Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
From the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears.
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path
Freedom is the new F word, people.
and want to feel less alone along the way,
We got you. Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them. Hi, friends.
Good morning.
It's kind of early for us.
It is.
You still in your rainbow unicorn onesie?
I am. I actually put it on for the occasion. I do typically sleep naked. Not typically, always, without fail.
Me too. Clothing in bed, such a hindrance.
Totally.
It's so uncomfortable for me now.
But so I do have my unicorn onesie on because it's 15 degrees outside and
It is.
wintertime.
So it is. Today we're talking about money. Money and debt.
Money and debt. Yes. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this because I have witnessed myself have a massive evolution in my relationship to money in the past year. I've kind of looked at myself with some wide-eyed wonder as I see myself loosen the grip of fear that I realized I didn't necessarily think I had that my whole life, but now I realize that I did, and that I loosened my grip of fear on it.
Yeah, and this is a heavy topic. It feels like a heavy topic compared to what we usually talk about. It's a very different topic.
I remember actually before we got married, my partner saying one of the reasons why we started with a therapist was because there's three primary reasons why people get divorced.
Yeah.
And
I've heard.
It's money, sex, and kids.
Uh-huh.
So this was a topic that we talked through, navigated lots of times during our relationship. And I had my eye on it, but I've been able to really unpack it during the relationship and then also massively shift it in the past year.
Interesting. And was it part of your divorce?
I wouldn't say consciously for me it was part of the divorce, but I would say that I needed to get divorced in order to shift my mindset around it. I think there was a relationship to it, which we'll get into around this, but I think it, So not he and I were fighting about it,
Right.
but that something on a subconscious level exploded open for me when we did get divorced.
Okay. So let's talk about debt. What's your idea of debt? How were you raised to think about money and debt?
So I would say I was raised to live within our means, which was, I would say, lower middle class, but enough. We always had enough money for the things that we needed. We always had enough money for food and for our housing, but we would drive to vacations. Shopping and getting new things and new furniture, that was not a pastime. But when we needed to get a dining room table, we would get the new dining room table. I have no sense that my parents ever had credit card debt.
Okay. Gotcha.
And they took out a second mortgage on the house when my brother and I went to college. I know that they had debt at that time. And I remember when I went away to college, right, as a freshman, my parents gave me a credit card and they said, only use it for emergencies. And so 4 years later, I had no emergency, so I never used my credit card.
Nice.
Yeah. So I had this sense that you don't have debt unless it's an emergency. And that's how to be responsible with money, I would say. Now, that's regarding debt. But in terms of making money, my parents did not make a lot of money. They did not aspire to make a lot of money. They did not actually value making money. As former missionaries, definitely actually saw money as related to power, as related to bad, evil kind of thing.
So little judgment about money.
Yes. In fact, I remember thinking about getting an MBA and my dad was like, what, do you only care about money? Didn't I raise you differently than that?
Wow.
And so, yes, there was actually judgment about, so don't have debt, but don't have money.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that a little bit. First, I want to notice that I've never heard someone refer to spending money as a pastime. You're like, it wasn't a pastime for us.
Oh.
But I think that's an interesting distinction.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a hobby. It wasn't something you did for fun.
Where I did it for fun is that On many Sundays after church, my Aunt Dot would come over and then we would go to the mall and we would go shopping and she might get me something. It was that, but it was very specifically Sundays after church.
Yeah,
And she was taking me out as a treat. That was part of our bonding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is fascinating, I think.
Right. I also remember, and this is just to highlight how like special things were, that my mom worked extra overtime hours to save for my prom dress so I could get the prom dress that I wanted.
Yeah. Yes. That is also a very specific mentality.
Mm-hmm. And I also said I didn't feel like I was missing anything.
How about at school? Like, did people have designer jeans that you wanted? Or was there anything like that where you had envy?
It's so interesting because the things that happened for, like my dad, I did want designer jeans when I was 5, and my dad did buy them for me for Christmas, and they were, I'm not kidding, that they were a size I wore them for the next 5 years. They were Vidal Sassoons, and like I could roll the cuffs up to like my knee. And
Vidal Sassoon.
Yeah. And it was like a really big deal that I got
the
those.
jeans.
Yes. There's more to that story. Like my mom's best friend just like referred to that. She's like, you got like fashion, you got like name brand jeans when you were 5. Like, why did you get So really a big deal. But then we also, so in that way, like my parents did, like when my like envy was like really, really big, they would meet it if they like could align somehow. My brother and I were just a year apart, and my aunt bought a car when we were in high school, so that when we got her old car, it wasn't a fancy car. It was a Dodge Aries K in shit brown was the color. So that was the car I drove, but I had a car. So it was like, oh, I didn't have a fancy car, but I got a car, and that represented freedom anyway. So in this way, I had what I needed, even if it wasn't the fancy version of it.
Nice. Wow. That's really so interesting. Okay, so now I want to know, when you came out of your house, went to school, and then came into the real world, did you have judgment about rich people or people who had more money?
No, because I think I had a lot of friends, especially I went to an Ivy League school. I had a lot of friends who had money, and I was quite comfortable in their worlds. And I remember my mom actually saying one time, I was describing a house that I was in, and she's like, wow, she's like, were you comfortable there? And she was like looking at me with awe, kind of like, awe. And I could see how her discomfort in the presence of money was not, I did not carry that with me. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, I had a comfort with it, but it wasn't, and there was an aspiration I had to like want nice things to some degree, but it wasn't a like, oh my gosh, I need to have a lot of money. There was a way more than I had growing up, and in the scheme of what I now know to be a lot of money, not a lot of money at all.
Yeah. Okay. Did you create debt then after college? You hadn't used your credit card?
No. So the time that I created debt, so I was really fortunate in that I moved to Colorado. I'm from New York originally. Moved to Colorado, and my best friend, Jeannie at the time, was like, okay, you're going to move in with me and then buy a house. Save your money and buy a house. And I was
She told you that?
Yeah. I was 25. And she had just bought her house. She was 26. And I was like, oh, because back in the day, this is in 2000, she bought a house for $100,000. And I remember just being like super confused, because in New York and Long Island, where I was from, people only bought a house in their 30s when they were getting married with kids and getting ready to have a family with kids. Like, I just didn't know anyone who was buying a house at a young age. So she really opened my idea to like, oh, that's possible out here. And I remember, so I was like saving my money, and then I was like, oh, like I was doing all the numbers, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I could just ask my Aunt Dot for $10,000 to buy a house. And she said yes. And I got a 3% down FHA loan at whatever percentage rate it was. And so for $10,000, I was able to buy a $160,000 house when I was 26.
Wow, that's a good story. So vintage.
So vintage. So not what Denver life is like now. So back to your question of, did I go into debt? No. So I did that. But then I bought a house like at the upper max of what I could qualify for and afford, which was $160,000. But then I had to put on a credit card in order to fix, like I was finishing out the basement.
Sure.
So then I was in debt, and I remember being so panicked of like, oh my gosh, I'm investing in this house. I'm putting this up on a credit card because I need to have a roommate in order to pay off the mortgage. I was so afraid of being house poor. And so I remember the time. And then just really luckily for me is that this was a time when houses were appreciating so much. So within 10 months of me buying it, my house had appreciated another, I think it was 100 grand almost immediately. And so then I was able to pay off the debt that I had accrued.
Okay, so this is Cherokee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cherokee is the house.
Yeah, on Cherokee Street we're talking about in Denver. So, okay, so you didn't have credit card debt at that time. You paid your bills on time.
Right.
Sounds like you took pride in your credit score. I always did too.
I did.
I love to see that number. I'm like, I am killing it.
Yeah.
And I also recognize this is a point of privilege though, because I didn't have to put things on credit card because my parents helped me out. My parents paid for my college. Did your parents pay for your college?
They paid for half and then I
Had
paid
loans.
for half.
Got it. Okay. All right. So I think what you're saying is that you've been responsible with money. You were in debt for your house.
For my house when I was 26. And
But
then
in general, you probably haven't been in a ton of debt otherwise.
No,
it sounds like.
other than my school loans, I had never was in credit card debt.
Okay. And so fast forward to now, you just got divorced. Well, no, almost a year ago. And how have things changed?
So I would say that again, like the mentality of, always living within my means was something that I carried into our relationship. And then my partner made a lot more money than I did and lived a bigger life than I did. I had lived very big. I had traveled a lot in the, in these 25 years that we're talking about here. Done a lot of travel, but as you remember, when I was 40, right, I moved into my basement so that I could rent the Airbnb, the upstairs of the house, so that I could afford to go around the world and fly first class to Tokyo for my 40th birthday for myself.
I love that story. So great.
I'd have a party. And so I felt like I lived big, but I always figured out a way so I could afford it. When I was partnered, I suddenly was living bigger and I was living a life that I was like, oh, I would not be able to afford this. He's definitely affording the life that I am living.
Yeah.
We had a beautiful loft downtown and we did a lot of travel and did a lot of different things that he was paying for a lot of it. Of course, I was still working and I was like, and we had an agreement in our finances. I paid for half of our fixed expenses, but then it was like a 90-10 ratio of our discretionary income that he covered.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're accustomed to someone else paying and living that life.
I was aware that I would not be able to afford this life on my own.
Yeah. Okay. And so how did that impact your divorce?
I would say that what ended up happening for me was that last year, so 2022, that my business, which had been on a trajectory, I'd had my company for 7 years at that point. I had had some ups and downs being an entrepreneur, but in that particular year, first quarter was on my way to having my biggest year ever and to making the financial goal, which I'll say was my goal was to make 150K in a 12-month period. And I had that goal for a really long time. And I remember in that moment being like, okay, like I'm on track to do this if all things being equal. And then things stopped being equal because all of my sources of getting customers stopped and I did not get a single new customer for the next 9 months. And that had never happened in my entire time in business. It was very confusing, startling. And there was something that I was also surrendered to of like, oh, like something is happening and I'm not sure what it is. That was first quarter that change happened. And then by the time the end of the year came around, I was no longer being able to pay for my business expenses. And so I had business credit card debt for the first time.
Yeah.
Which resulted in me having some personal credit card debt. So for the first time in my life, in December of last year, I was like, oh, wow, I'm now in debt. And then we decided to get divorced.
The timing. So I'm going to go back to something you said though a minute ago. I think you said, I felt something else come through. Something was changing.
Yes.
What are you talking about? And how did you hear that message?
For a quick summary, brave hearts, I would say that in the arc of my life, that from like 0 to 40, I was like learning how to human and how to like be responsible in this world, be a good friend, be a good employee, be a good boss, like do all these different things.
Yeah.
How to function well, high functioning in the world. Then my 40 to 49 was when my spiritual awakening started. This is, I can say now, this like consciously, this wasn't intentional. Like I didn't start that, like that just started happening. And so in 2022, when something was coming through, I was like very deep. I had much more awareness about my spirituality and was like, oh, if I'm not getting clients, that could mean something else is supposed to be coming through. I had enough awareness of spirit at that point. And I was still freaking out, as you remember, about not having money and that not having clients. And so like, it wasn't like I was like, oh, no problem. This is great. It's great. It's not that at all. But I at least had the curiosity of, oh, this is super weird. Maybe there's something I don't understand is shifting in me. Does that make sense?
As much sense as it can make. I think what is so fascinating about having watched your financial journey is your ability to listen to spirit and not freak out too much.
Right. I would say, as you know, for that year and a lot of this year, I was very freaked out.
Yeah, because it was a massive change for you. Yeah. And so what else was spirit telling you so you were in this situation in December of last year. Your business hadn't made money, and now you're going to get divorced.
Right. And then the big piece is, so my partner and I had lived in a duplex. We were living on one side. We had planned to sell the other side. And then in the conversations about getting divorced, we decided that I would move on the other side. And that felt true. And in a medicine journey, it was like, yep. And you're going to call that side the goddess temple. And so I was like, yeah, like that's definitely what's happening. And so we decided on December 14th is when we filed. Like we decided, I think, on December 10th to get divorced. We filed on the 14th and we agreed that as of January 1, I would move over to the other side. And from that point on, I would be financially separate. Like we were just, it was like 2 weeks later, then you're on your own.
Right. Except duplex is massive, right? And it was purchased with your husband's income in mind.
Yes.
Along with all of the repairs and the upgrades he's doing.
Right.
And so at that time, we're like, well, how am I going to afford?
I don't know what I was actually rationally thinking, but I was aware that on January 1, I was now going to have a monthly payment of $7,800, and which was, I don't know, 7 times more than I've ever had to pay, essentially.
For a mortgage or for a monthly mortgage or rent.
But we all just said it's a big house. I was like, okay, I can Airbnb it. I can make money.
Yeah.
I'm going to start doing some other tantra work. I had some other things coming through me. And I was like, and this feels correct. This is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I was also aware. I was like, wow, like now not only am I in debt, I am in this exact moment of like December 31st of last year, making the least amount of money that I've ever made. And now my expenses are the highest by far that they've ever been that I'm responsible for. Yeah. So that like perfect storm all came to pass.
Yes. And I just tell you, Bravehearts, that when she was doing all this, I was like, are you sure you want to move into this house next door? You have another house.
Right. This is a house that I bought. I was 26.
On Cherokee that we just referenced. Is that how you want to be spending your money? You don't have the money. You're going to go into debt. Like, I mean, I was anxious for you, for sure. So were you. But I was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But the whole time you're like, no, I'm listening to spirit. This is what I'm supposed to do. So related to what I asked earlier about, how is it that you're listening to spirit or that you're feeling this thing come through? And I think this is foreign to some people. This is something both of us have worked on and skills that we've honed during our spiritual awakenings. And I'm still not that good at it, but I'm much better than I used to be. And so how did you keep channeling that voice when it was constantly competing with the voice of, fuck, you don't have enough money. Mm-hmm. Fuck, this bill is due. Oh my gosh, how are we going to pay this? So how did you navigate those voices, and how do you shut one up and listen to the other?
I think there was both were happening at the same time. So I think that there was a part of me that understood I didn't know. I was aware that I needed to stop outguessing the universe or outguessing spirit. Because to your point, on a rational note, choosing to move over next door into the goddess temple didn't make sense from a money perspective. And yet, being a neighbor to my partner and still holding this idea of chosen family did make sense, and that the goddess temple represented something that is still to this day still unfolding. But I was like, oh, like, I don't know what it's going to be, but is it going to be a community gathering place? Is it going to be, I don't know. But again, in words that I can say now, is that I actually really believe that the goddess temple was demanding me to rise, like having these expenses, but no longer was like, oh, I want to make $150,000 for myself so I can do whatever. It was like, oh no, I need to make this money so I can pay for the goddess temple, because the goddess temple has a purpose that I don't yet know, but I'm listening to spirit for. And suddenly, and I'll get into this other topic of like, of the soul of money, was that suddenly it was like, oh, it's like, I'm not making money for myself. I'm making something for something bigger than me, which is the goddess temple. And that's in service to a community, to a collective, so to something that I don't understand yet. And thus, and it's now been 12 months that I've gotten to see every month I've been able to figure out how to pay this bill. Now, still in debt because I've been paying the bill every month, but I just have to live. And so there's other expenses that are coming through that are on a credit card, which I'll talk about as well. But that was the only bill that mattered. That I was like, if I can do this, then that's showing me something. And so that's what's been happening every month.
This is fascinating because it's so synonymous with what I've been talking about recently regarding following your ego versus your calling, or your inner witch versus your evil twin. Like, how do you decide what to listen to? And one of the discernments is that your ego, your rational mind, wants you to have something for yourself. And your spiritual mind or your calling wants you to impact the world and to be something for a greater purpose. And that's what you just described.
Yes.
You knew that the goddess temple was serving not you, not just you,
right,
but a much greater purpose and more people,
right,
more human beings,
right. Which was why I was like, Cherokee, when I really got quiet, didn't make sense. Cherokee's is a much smaller house, and yes, it has a much smaller mortgage payment, but I was like, it doesn't have as many options. Like, I couldn't feel the expansion of my soul in Cherokee Street that I could in the goddess temple. So there's some shifts that happened, some other shifts that happened along the way regarding money. So when I was in partnership, I realized we had a lot of different bank accounts, but I used to tie my worth to the money that was in my company's bank account. And we had several companies and we had different properties, but that was the only account that I would look at that counted towards what I was like, how much am I making and what am I worth? And then in the medicine journey I did last year, I was finally able to break free of that. I had thought about my eulogy, like when I died, and what would people say? No one, when I die, will mention how much money I've made as part of how I've impacted them. I just had this profound realization that it was totally ridiculous that I would tie my worth to one specific bank account and the amount of money that was in there. I mean, I can remember like just like laughing and being like, oh my gosh, no one cares how much money I have as far as like why they would come to my funeral and what they would say about me. And so that somehow broke me free of saying, oh, how much I'm making in this one particular way is tied to my value and worth in this world. And so then when I moved over to the goddess temple, I was like, oh, however money's coming to me, all counts. Like it's no longer tied to my worth. It was like, okay, if I get money from someone renting my house, great, that counts as money I've made. If I get a refund on my auto insurance, that counts as money I've made. If I, get a new client, that counts. Like all of this was like, great, here's money coming in, and now here it's going out again for the goddess temple. So then I got to be like, did I pay the bill? Yay, I paid the bill. It wasn't how much money did I make this month, and
I see.
My worth was tied to it.
Okay, so that's an important distinction. So you hear the distinction of the money not needing to come from your business. It doesn't matter how you get it, it's money coming in. As far as the distinction of no one caring how much money you had when you on your deathbed and your eulogy is something we've all heard before. Like, oh, this is what older people say. No one talks about like, I wish I'd had more money. And the bottom line is like, it's hard for me to totally accept that and be like, yeah, that's true. And if you want to impact other people, you need money. If you want to live your purpose, you need money.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not disregarding money. I'm not saying I don't need money. When I think of people who are like big philanthropists, someone who's made a lot of money in their lifetime for whatever reason, right? And then they've, given it away, right? And like, oh, like they were really generous with their money. I don't think anyone's going to say, oh, you were really generous with your money. I was really generous with my time, with my space, with your heart, with my heart.
Yeah. Got it.
That's probably the better. Money's still required in my life.
Yeah.
But the generosity is being felt from my heart.
Okay. That resonates. Yeah. The next question I wanted to address was about this new credit card debt, because that really changed. You hadn't had credit card debt, and then you started it with your business, and then you did find a new line of work, so you've been able to pay the mortgage every month. I think you had to end up putting a lot of stuff on a personal credit card, right?
I did.
Which was hot. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, I was fucking freaked out. And it was like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. Okay, I'm trusting. Oh my God, I'm freaked out.
You're so good.
Okay, I'm trusting.
Yeah.
During this time, at the end of first quarter, I had my Indian palm leaf reading, which for those of you who've listened to our episode on woo.
Listen, all the way that's crazy and true. It's a different episode.
Yes.
It talks about the palm leaf reading, but go on.
During that reading, it was so impactful to me because what they ended up saying was that, like for the next 2 years, your expenses are going to be higher than your income and you're going to be learning a lot. Sort of like an education. And in 1 hour and a half psychic reading completely changed my whole attitude, which was like, oh, I went to college. I graduated with debt that I had for 10 years before I paid it off. And I didn't think twice about it. I was like, yeah, I'm going to college. I'm going to be in debt. Like that's it. And I haven't gone back to grad school because I had never found the thing that I was like, this is what I should be spending my money on. And now I was like, oh, if I just look at this next 2 years as my like grad school I have just starting over with my entire life. That switch of mentality of paying for an education, it just looks different. It's not a school loan. It's like the school of hard knocks, as they say. I was like, okay, this is what it costs for me to rebuild my life right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm, doing workshops, different things, but also figuring out how to pay and build the goddess temple to have the right energetic frequency. Like this is the color of the couch it should be. So I'm really listening to what's supposed to be doing, investing in my money in things that feel very consciously attuned to an energetic frequency, both in my own soul's growth and in the growth and evolution of the goddess temple. That's my education. And so when I did that, I was like, oh, okay. I had like in my head, it was like, okay, I'm going to get divorced. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to start paying these bills. And then I'm going to start paying off my credit card debt by second quarter. And then as we've also talked about arbitrary deadlines, it was that arbitrary deadline that was causing me to freak the fuck out of like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to start paying off this credit card debt in 3 months. And then I was like, okay, it's 2 years. It's 3 years. I have no idea when I'm totally going to be out of this debt. And it's part of my education.
Okay. This is a fascinating story. And the timing is critical because you thought you'd be in debt for 6 months. Now you're going to be in debt for multiple years. And that is just a shifting of expectation.
Right. And also recognizing credit card debt is bad debt.
Right. Right. Of course it is.
And
that's what we were taught.
Yes. And financial responsibility is like ridiculous amount of interest and all that stuff. So still me knowing, okay, let me still be smart about the debt that I have. Can I get a consolidated credit card loan? Do all the things that my human knows to be responsible to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
And
gonna be in debt.
I'm gonna be in debt.
So I want to just dig in a little bit more to something I heard because I find it fascinating and I don't know how you do it. And I'm wondering if the brave hearts are wondering this too. You said, okay, I was in my hour and a half palm leaf reading, and it completely changed my perspective. And so I think you mentioned this maybe 20 minutes ago too, when you were talking about a medicine journey. I came and I was like, oh my gosh, everything is different. And I just like to know how you do that, because I think I'm not alone in thinking that for me, I guess I can only speak for myself, that I do have experiences that provide shifts for me, or aha moments. But there is, perhaps, and I can guess why this is, a resistance to new information, a clinging to old patterns, a holding on to a confirmation of bias about my old beliefs, that I don't think everyone is so comfortable or so fluidly just says, oh, yeah, I have a completely new perspective now after that hour and a half. That sounds amazing, and it sounds challenging. And not always, but I think that the way that you describe that makes it sound like it flows pretty quickly for you. And I don't know if that's really my experience. I'm just curious if you can describe, is that an open-mindedness? Is that just a lack of attachment to the way you think of things today versus tomorrow?
It's a great question. I've not reflected on it specifically.
I know it's a stumper, and I'm just like, come to me. Have you say, I know you really well. And I'm like, oh yeah, this happens to you, not frequently, but consistently.
What I would say is that, what's the phrase? Overnight successes take 10 years or 20 years to happen. I've been mulling over my attachment of my worth to money for years and years and years and years, and reading books. And there's a couple of articles I'm going to refer to. One is the Soul of Money by Lynn, which was so impactful for me 6 years ago when I read it. And I've read lots of books about money. I had been chipping away, trying to understand this for a really long time, freaking out along the way, getting a little snippet, moving me forward, freaking out along the way, forgetting my snippet, having to remember what I had learned that released something, right? So, So what it feels like to me is that it completely changed my perspective was like, oh, I just finally hit the straw that like switched my perspective over. But actually I had been
working on it for a while.
On it for
that makes sense. Yeah.
For a really long time.
And I think that's true. I can see that in you, and I have experienced that as well. And there's some tipping point that comes.
Yes.
Which came with the Indian palm leaf reading or your medicine journey.
Right. And I think what happens is, though, when the tipping point happens for me, then I become very excited, very expressive, and tell everyone about it.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, this just happened. Where you probably know, but probably no one else knows what struggles I've been having with money.
Right. So you've been talking about it.
Right.
Yeah. I see. No, that's helpful. Okay. Yeah.
In a way, it's back to our conversation. Like, oh, when I finally land something and I'm in my radiance of understanding, that's when I talk about it. And I think that's, like, I'm no longer processing. I'm like, oh, here's the summary of my experience wrapped up in a tiny bow. And that's the Indian palm leaf reading. But actually there was years of processing prior to that.
Right. So let's go to the 3 to 4 lessons you've learned about money from a more concrete perspective in the last year.
Yes. One is privilege. When I got divorced, I went into debt, but I had a lot of credit cards. So I didn't have any credit card debt really prior, but then I had, I don't know, $150,000 of credit card limit that I could conceivably put on a credit card. I also had an 800 credit score. I also knew how to get consolidated loans, or was eligible rather to get a consolidated loan. But I didn't think about all of that as privilege. I was like, okay, here's the tools that I have that I'm working with. But I was talking to a friend, really dear friend, who had gotten divorced 2 years before me. As I was telling her about my experience, she was like, oh my gosh, you were so lucky you had money you could put on a credit card. And I was like, what do you mean? And so she was Australian, had married an American, moved to the States. She was in her 20s. They were married for maybe 2 or 3 years. I don't remember. But when she got divorced, everything had been in his name. So she had no history of credit here in the US. She didn't have a credit score and she hadn't been working in their marriage. And so she didn't have any credit history that counts towards being eligible to apply for a credit card or to get a loan or to do these things that I had actually taken for granted. And what I realized, I actually had been responsible my whole life about money, so that in this moment, I do have the ability. If suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, how lucky am I to be able to have credit card debt? How lucky am I that I can qualify for a loan? And that I was in a way very proud of myself that I had, but my responsibility with money for the last 30 years of my life allowed me, like suddenly having credit card debt was a really responsible thing. Like it was like the gift for all my responsibility that I was suddenly eligible for that. So just like her story really showed me how it's not just it's not just about having money. It's actually about being eligible to have credit cards that can let you get ahead in different ways.
Interesting. And the funny thing is that I didn't have any credit card debt when I was 23 because my parents had paid for my college and they'd helped me through school and I'd had some jobs. And because I didn't have any credit card debt, I couldn't buy a car. So I didn't have any credit, didn't have any good credit. So I just spent 9 months using a credit card and paying it off so that I could buy a car. And that was just so shocking to me. Because I was like, no, I don't have credit card debt. Right. And this to me in my mind made me a good person, right? Or like a responsible person more. So it's just interesting how like credit card debt is like a rite of passage.
Exactly. And then, and then the responsibility part is like paying it off every month. I think you're bringing up a point, which is if you go into the spiritual realm and don't actually know how to navigate money in this human realm, then it doesn't get you anywhere. Like there's still this piece of you have to know how money works, and credit card debt and a credit score and credit history are all things that this American culture require.
Yes, good point. Yeah, exactly. It is, in fact, a privilege to be able to get a credit card and pay it off every month and have been taught to treat money responsibly and do that.
So then another big experience that I had was regarding Roth IRAs. I have invested the max amount in a Roth IRA, which is like $5,000 or $6,000 since 2009. But for those of you who know about retirement funds, like I always just was like, okay, like you can't, like you put the money
don't touch
in,
it.
you can't touch, definitely don't touch it. You can't take it out till you're 59 and a half. It's so irresponsible to take money out of a retirement fund to pay off credit card debt, right? Because then you have the fees and the penalties, and it just means you've been totally irresponsible.
It's interesting. I just want to stop you there because like that definitely was, of course, always the education I got for so long. And I would say in the last 5 years, I have just met more and more people who have taken out that money, right? And they've just gotten over that hurdle, that societal judgment, and said, you know what? I need this money fucking now.
Yes.
And much to the point of like, it's so much harder to plan for the next 20 years because we don't know what's going to happen. The world is changing so fast and I'm changing and you're changing. And a 5-year plan just isn't in the cards anymore. And so I do think our society in a sense, and at least how we live our life points more to, it's okay to take that out.
Right.
And yeah, of course you do want to save. You're not going to be able to work and you might get sick and that still remains. And I just think there's more permission to do it now.
Yeah. And I guess, and I haven't tracked that as much. Like I was definitely on my own inner journey with it, but back to like, so what I learned was that with Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA, since that's after tax investment, I was able to take out money from that without penalty and without fees up to how much I've contributed. And I'm saying, I want to say this very specifically for those, because everyone I've told, a lot of people don't know that you can do that. You would get taxed with penalties and fees on your earnings, on your contributions, but you can take your contributions out without fees and penalty from a Roth IRA before 59 and a half. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh, like what's like, you know, retirement funds are all about compounding interest. And I was like, even with the compounding interest that I'm losing by pulling this money out, the amount I'm making per year on that as compared to what the interest rates are on a credit card, it actually made it that taking the money out was, again, the better financial investment. Once I got out of like the moral piece of like, oh my gosh, you're taking out your retirement money.
Wow.
I was like, this is actually a good financial decision for me.
Wow. That's really inspiring. Just everything you're learning. Yeah. How you're being smarter with your money. That's awesome. Tell me about financial advisors.
So I ended up hiring a financial advisor. Which is something I've wanted to do my whole life. But here I am in debt and realized that, oh, there's more I need to know. And here's my time to do it. And so I invested money that, again, I put it on a credit card to hire him.
Why didn't you hire one before?
I felt like I didn't have enough money before I was married.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were married, my partner felt like comfortable with his financial savviness.
Okay. Got it.
And so in a way, it's like my own rite of passage of like, oh, now I'm my own person again.
Yeah.
And I don't have the money, but I was like, there's parts about money that I need to be smarter about. So he actually taught me that I didn't have to, like, my goal didn't have to be in paying off all of my credit card debt. It was that it's all about my debt to income ratio. Different game.
You've mentioned a few concrete lessons you've learned, which is awesome and really helpful. And we've talked about listening to spirit and listening to a higher calling about your money. But you also mentioned the soul of money in the beginning of our conversation. What does that mean to you, and what's that about?
Yes, I would say that is the key that has like changed things for me from a giving me a way to not freak out. And so the soul of money, the book, Soul of Money by Lynn. So there's another article that I've read, which is The Sacred Dimensions of Money by Bruce Lyons, which also was really impactful. And it describes money through the lens of like personality, which is like form, like objects or bills or things like that. And then like there's the soul of money, and then there's the spirit of money, these different aspects to it. And for me, the best and simplest way to describe it is, and the Goddess Temple is this perfect example of, oh, somehow the universe has provided me the money that I have needed with my efforting. It's not like I'm just sitting here on a chair doing nothing. The money that I need for this soul's purpose of the Goddess Temple. And if I like stop grasping of trying to figure out how the money is going to come in and just allow myself to know it's coming in. So I can either choose to freak out every month of like, oh my God, how am I going to get this money? Which I have done many months this year, to the point that now I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to trust the fact that every month this is happening. I'm doing my part to figure out how to make money, but I'm also doing my part by not freaking out about it, which is like a constriction around energy and like making, like operating from fear instead of operating from trust.
Yeah.
And that the reason why like that flow is happening is because there's a higher purpose. I'm gonna get the money for the Goddess Temple because the Goddess Temple is in service to something bigger than me. And I'm not trying to make the money for myself. Yes, I get to benefit. I live in a beautiful home, but I'm actually in service. Like, okay, but this home I am designing to be in service to others. And the more deeply I believe and trust and listen to that energy, and I'm just like leaning back in my chair with my hands open of like, okay, this is what's happening, then it's what happens.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm letting go of, oh, I should be out of debt in a certain number of months, and I shouldn't be paying debt at this interest rate, or I shouldn't have a mortgage that's big. Or it's like, oh no, it's like, where is the energy? Where is the ease? I don't think I've mentioned that word enough. Is if there is ease, then that to me means I'm in the flow of the soul and the energetic frequency of the universe, and money is part of that flow as well.
Wealth and woo, Bravehearts. You'll only hear it here. Maybe that's not true. I'm sure somebody's talking about this too, but
Lots of people.
it's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening today. Thanks for sharing your money story. Money. It's like not as taboo as the sex and the poly that we talk about, and yet it kind of is. Because people don't talk about money, right?
Yeah, they don't talk about how much their mortgage are. They don't talk about how much debt they're
making.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so true. It's just it's not allowed. So maybe this is just our first episode on money. Maybe there will be more. Maybe we'll break down my journey as well. Thanks for listening.
And the resources are, again, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist and Money's Sacred Dimensions. It's an article by Bruce Lyon.
We love you, Bravehearts.
Love you. Thanks for listening.
Do you need permission to be human? You got it. Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.